we go. Welcome back to Evolving Leadership and Workplace Culture Virtual Summit. I have Neil Patwardhan with us today. Thank you so much, Neil, for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That's awesome. Right. So tell the folks a little bit about you and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, I think so. Number one, disregard the chair in the background. That's placed there to ensure my 1.5-year-old doesn't come storming in, right, every 5 minutes. So, talk about home life and work life mixed together.
That would be an authentic moment, right?
That's right. Exactly. So brief background on me. So I'm here in Austin, Texas, and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Cambio. So Cambio in Spanish means change. And what we're doing is building the industry's first diversity-led recruiting platform. That is more of an end-to-end, if you think of it kind of as a Salesforce for modern recruiting, right? So really focused on ensuring that the right talent is matched to the right opportunity. Previous to that, I spent many years in tech in large companies like Dell and LG and Dun & Bradstreet, where I ran different marketing teams and sales and as well as corporate functions. And then I also had a startup in 2014, my first, where I built social networks for preschools and daycares for parents. So super niche, out of need, because my daughter just started preschool at the time, and I was inundated with emails from the school. I could not keep up. So I told them I'll build them an app with a news feed, and then it took off. So having said that, the idea for Cambio sort of came out from when I was a job seeker last year, and it became incredibly daunting to find the right fit for me. And then you quickly realize how incredibly broken the talent matching process is. So that kind of gave birth to an idea which evolved into what we have today.
Awesome. Yeah, and you and I were just introduced by a mutual connection recently. So I was happy to learn more about what you were working on and excited to support you. So thanks so much for being here to share your wisdom with all of our viewers today. I think it's going to be great.
Yep, absolutely. I don't know if it's wisdom; it's more from trials and tribulations and what I've been through. Right.
That's how we get wisdom, right? From experience, for sure. So let's dive into diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So a lot of times, and I think folks that everybody's heard of diversity, right? Some people call it diversity and inclusion. Some people use DEI, right? To use all three words. So why don't you break that down for us a little bit?
Sure, and in full disclosure, right, the very term DEI, DNI was actually alien to me about just 9 months ago, right? And so I'll kind of give a backstory on how I got kind of pulled into this world. And the story is actually the following, right? So at 15, I was an immigrant from India. At 16, I moved from one of the largest cities, Mumbai, India, to a small town in Carbondale, Illinois, which is primarily white. At 18, I moved to Texas Tech, which was, and I was one of 20 Indian kids in school at the time. At 22, I experienced my first reverse ageism in a role where I was denied being moved up because I was considered young. At 28, I married a Latina, a Mexicana. By 32, I have 2 kids who are mixed, half Indian, half Mexican. And so whether I knew it or not, I was living diversity throughout my time. I just didn't know it had a word. Right. And so when we started to build Cambio with the notion of that both sides, job seekers and recruiters, need to be uber transparent and efficient in trying to find each other, the concept of diversity kept coming up, right? And then you have companies that are investing a fair amount of time, resources, and people and efforts into crafting that ideal workforce, right? And so that spurns the terminology of DEI, DNI, and there's several other acronyms. But I think what's really interesting is understanding that 2 things. One, data has proven time over time that a diverse workforce contributes higher to a bottom line than a non-diverse one. Right? At the end of the day, that's an important data point to understand. But number 2, the very concept of DEI shouldn't be bundled together. They're 3 very separate work streams and ways to go change or drive change. And so when you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and then there's a new one called belonging, which has also now come into the equation, To me, diversity is sourcing diverse talent or ideas or voices to come into your workforce. Equity and inclusion focuses more on ensuring those voices are heard,
Hmm.
right, and heard repeatedly. And belonging relates more around how do you create that inclusive culture where someone feels part of, and a valuable part of that ecosystem.
Hmm.
And so, that's sort of always my first comment is when you're looking at potentially trying to work in one of these work streams, be uber clear on which one you want to focus on, because the path to doing actions is very different.
So I haven't heard of the belonging one before. This is interesting to me because I felt like inclusion covered belonging. Like if you're being inclusive, like to me, that
Sure.
definition would have meant that my employees feel like they belong, like feel like they're being heard, like you said. So do you have any opinions on that? Like,
Yeah, it's one of those gray areas that kind of bleeds in. And I've heard several variations where inclusion is at a company level, belonging is at team level. So you could kind of
okay.
play with the terminology back and forth. To me, it's interchangeable, especially those two, because at the end of the day, the end product is, can you make this person feel comfortable enough within your current environment for them to be very productive, right, and feel part of something. And so I think that to me is as the ultimate definition. We need to make
Mhm.
sure that whatever terminology route we take, we still kind of hit that marker.
Yeah, yeah, and I've also heard people say that you can't hire for diversity unless you've already created an inclusive culture, right? It's
Yep.
like, yeah, you can hire somebody who brings a diverse background, any kind of background, demographic, psychographic, but if they don't feel like they belong, if they don't feel like they are going to fit in with the team, then they might leave. Like you're going to lose them, right? You're going to
Yep.
lose that valuable diversity.
Exactly. And I think and that's easily relatable through data, right? Retention value is such an
Mhm.
important metric for a company. And so if you spend so much time trying to bring in the right talent that only leaves in a year, it's actually a very large cost on your bottom line. So I think the first
Mhm.
step, and I always tell people, and the analogy I use is, one, you've got to make sure your house is ready for the party, right? And make sure it's ready before you invite people.
Mhm.
And so to a lot of folks now, as we begin talking about DEI, the E and the I needs to be solved for first before you start to figure out how to include the D to bring it in.
Mhm. Awesome. That's great. Well, and you're ready, and you're there ready to help them with the
Yep.
with the D when they get to that point. That's awesome. So tell me then. So tell me what is a pre-hire platform and why is that important?
Yep. So if you look back to about almost 20 to 25 years ago, this concept of job boards and internal
Mhm.
applicant tracking systems, or ATSs, has continued to remain kind of the staple for HR, right, for recruiting.
Mhm.
And what most people don't know is that job boards, there's 10,332 of them, all different variations and shades, but they're essentially no more than traffic drivers, right? Yeah, their pitch is put out on my website. I get X amount of visitors or X amount of people in my database, and we'll provide you resumes. And then that intake is now being built into the applicant tracking system, which at its bare bones is nothing more than a workflow, right?
Mhm.
It's a workflow to advance candidates that are deemed as qualified from one stage to the other, involve people along the way in the interview process, and ultimately get to a go no go decision.
Mhm.
The problem with this sort of mechanics has been that it's been largely predicated for a very long time on volume, on quantity, right?
Mhm.
And so it's very hard to find quality when it's a quantity driven model. And the tools are not set up the same way. So when we talk about pre-hire process, it's literally the time you find a candidate in whatever route they entered your queue, to all the way down where you're about to extend a hire or an offer. Um, and what does that process look like? But it's incredibly broken and inefficient today. And so there are companies such as ours that are trying to tackle the space and kind of paint a future vision of what an end-to-end simplified pre-hire platform could look like for companies, that drives transparency and efficiency in the process.
Mhm. So tell us a little bit. Just give us a snapshot of what that looks like for you guys. How you're tackling that.
Sure. So I think there's a couple of gaps that we've clearly identified in what we've built on Cambio. I think from the biggest picture out of all these is when you think about the volume of resumes coming in, it was about 250 resumes per corporate posting last year in 2019. And with the impact of COVID and unemployment as it continues to rise, the Department of Labor is projecting about 10x that volume. So when you think about it from a recruiter perspective, right, and you're working, let's just say 10 or 15 open recs, and you're getting 2,500 resumes coming in on average from various different sources, it is impossible for you to go through each and every one of them, let alone try to find talent. And so I would digress back a step and say, the very first question you need to ask yourself as a recruiter or a talent acquisition professional or head of HR is, how do you define the word talent? Talent to me is not indicative of your resume, because if they looked at my resume, I've taken so many different roles over the years, but it's always been because someone asked me to, right? So for me, the clear thread is my talent is I work best in ambiguity. And that doesn't translate off a resume. So the important thing here is the definition of the word talent, and that will then lead into the culture fit and then your experience and what you actually bring to a table. And so having said that, a system as an ATS today has some very generic keyword algorithms, right, which are meant to filter or parse that resume volume. The problem is, as everybody knows with keywords, it's an old and outdated technology. And it needs to be an exact match for that resume to pass that filter. Right. Guess what? They're not teaching us out here in the marketplace, or even people entering the marketplace, not writing keyword-based resumes. Right. And we simply don't have the time to write 10, 15, 20 different keyword-based resumes.
Right.
So true stat, 52% of resumes submitted online last year to companies in the United States were declined by the ATS, never even made it to a recruiter. And so you just missed out on talent that you didn't even know you had. Right. And so what we've decided very quickly is we've got to eliminate this keyword methodology. And so when companies use Cambio, we become essentially a part of their HR stack, and we replace their ATS completely because we've got workflows built in. But the intention is proprietary matching that we do based on NLP, natural language processing. So as you place your jobs through Cambio out into the virtual world, and as people start to apply, they create profiles on Cambio. We treat a candidate's 360 profile in 4 parts, right? That's part 1 is your resume, which is important. Part 2 is your pitch video. So we encourage every candidate to create a pitch video on who they are more than a piece of paper. Right. Your soft skills, your persona, your personality. There was a LinkedIn study that was done last year that said that 80% of talent acquisition professionals are increasingly thinking that soft skills are important for a company's success. But you tell me how you expect to find that off a piece of paper.
Well, and they're not included in the job posting.
That's right.
Right? The job the job description is very technical, right? We want you to do this. We want you to have 10 years of experience doing this. But then I see all the time how soft skills are important. Like that's how you're going to be successful, but that's not how they're hiring. That's right. What they're looking for.
That's right. So we bring that forward in the video component of that candidate profile. And then part 3 is your references, part 4, your skills. So we took the same LinkedIn skills that you may have on your LinkedIn profile, and we actually weighted them. And then we include it into a matching. So the way matching works is, think of it very similar as a CRM, right? I think it's time that we started to understand that candidates need to be nurtured. They need to be taken through the process. And so very similar to a CRM scoring, let's just say you had 2,500 resumes come in on your posting on Cambio, we would then run our proprietary matching against your job description and actually show you, here are 40 that are a 70% match or higher. Right? So now as a recruiter, you can be highly efficient and walk through your pipeline of candidates very quickly, look at their video, look at their resume, look at their skills, their references, and then quickly move them to the next stage of screening or decline them. And we will automatically let the candidate know that they're no longer being considered or being considered, to drive transparency in the process. So that is kind of a big part of what we do. And then woven into the engine and the matching is the diversity component. Right? So we are very, very bullish on diversity sourcing. It is something that almost nobody tackles because today the very systems prevent you from legally sourcing diversity. So what we've been able to figure out and got the blessing from a bunch of labor lawyers is how to include diverse attributes into the engine. So if both sides optionally request to find each other, we can serve up underrepresented talent that is a positive match for your role. And so underrepresented talent, it could be a talent of color, it could be gender, it could be disability, it could be special needs, it could be veterans, it could be second chance hiring, it could be age, which is ageism is a huge issue. So you're looking at a mechanism that allows a recruiter to visually find incredible diverse talent that originally would have been buried in a mountain of resumes that had just come in. So that's where Cambio becomes important, because we're essentially walking the walk on how you should source diverse candidates responsibly, take them through your workflow, and eventually we hope that it's a happy marriage that goes influences your company and your bottom line.
Yeah, so I think now I would guess when people see those questions on an application, a lot of times they might avoid answering them because they're worried that would then eliminate them. So so how do you tackle that in that, like, no, I really want you to answer those questions and be honest about that information?
So the EEOC compliance questions have been around for a long time. Almost every ATS has them, right? And any company with 50 employees or more is required to report that to the EEOC at the end of the year. Having said that, they are optional. And there has been, time and time again over the number of years, the stigma around if I answer, then I might be discriminated against in the process.
Right.
And partly that is true. Bias exists in the process no matter what, right? It's always been there. We're human beings, we're biased. But what has largely been not accounted for is the misuse of this information. And how do you hold people accountable if there is misuse of the information? So the way we've built a diversity engine on Cambio is, yes, we've got the matching capability, and we encourage job seekers to self-identify themselves. And we use legal language that states that, hey, if you do self-identify, this information won't be used against you. And then we are using this to match you to employers that may be looking for more diverse candidates. But to make sure that the system is not abused, we surface every single click by every single recruiter versus every single candidate versus every single job versus every single stage of the funnel over a period of time. And so through our analytics that the head of HR gets to view, you can now get down to a recruiter or a hiring manager level to understand if there is a data-driven narrative around potential bias. So very simply, it could be, this person on my recruiting team over the last 2 quarters has been 80% biased towards declining African-American females for this particular role, even though the algorithm stated that they were a 70% match or higher. That is irrefutable data that says there is a issue, there is a problem. And I'm very careful when I also say this, is the data here is not meant to shame you, right? It's not meant to shame HR professionals. It's meant to make you more aware, because 9 times out of 10, most of us are not even aware we have a bias. Right. So this is where the accountability piece becomes so important, and a valuable part of what's been missing from the DEI world for so long is how do you drive the right programs based on data that ID flags that you can then help kind of create better programs on and drive more awareness and into the future.
Yeah, that piece seems critical, right? It's training, right? It's just awareness, like, hey, this is what's happening. Let's do better, right? Let's do better. So you brought up data-driven narratives. Talk about just in general, what does that mean? How are other departments using that? And then go into kind of more about this in HR.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is that, in my opinion, HR remains one of the last organizations in a company that is not heavily focused on driving decisions through data, right? You talk to a sales organization, a marketing organization, even events, right? KPIs are so important. ROI is so important. And so I think, in HR's case, human analytics is a hot topic now that's starting to come out. Mercer's leading the challenge there in a lot of different ways. But how do you actually build a mechanism to serve that data up? So historically, when you use an ATS or or a HRIS, which is essentially another system for benefits and new employee onboarding, et cetera, there's data that's collected, right, on every candidate that kind of goes through. The problem is the data is not being activated against. It's not being visualized in a way that's actually helpful to HR recruiters, and it sits in two silos. Right. It sits in this silo and this silo, and there isn't a linear correlation on what the effect of this really is. Right. So when you use Cambio, it's centered around data and data perspectives, right? So the analytics dashboard gives you an entire end-to-end pre-hire view. So anything before you extend an offer, all the way from the time someone saw your job, so the source, right, of your job, and all the way down to the different parts of the funnel. But I think what becomes equally important is the diversity lens on top of the data. Right. So if I'm a head of HR, or if I'm head of talent acquisition, or head of people, or whatever other title that you prefer, I can now look at my entire pre-hire pipeline by job, by recruiter, by date range, and now also by diversity lens. So I can get to see, what percentage of veterans are interacting with my role, what percentage of African American females are interacting with my role, what percentage of different other underrepresented groups are interacting with my role. And then because we are a swipe culture for fun, it's swipe right to apply, swipe left to decline, we also capture that as a data point. So we can now give you a definitive data point that states how many people through the diversity lens actually passed on your jobs, didn't apply to them. And that is a huge crucial point to make, because this is understanding how your jobs are being perceived by different people, your language, the way you write them. And so this is, again, giving you that idea that depending on how you view your data, there's a narrative over time that you start to understand, and then you can start to course correct how you can write a better job description, attract the right talent, how it's being nurtured, how stagnant the candidates are in every stage of the funnel, right? For whatever reason, there's internal efficiencies, people are not moving fast enough. These are all things that you can hold accountable for.
And are you thinking about doing kind of like surveys to like people that have seen jobs, asking them those questions? Why? Like, is that something that you've thought about doing or already doing?
We are. So it's on our roadmap that eventually, and on both sides. So if an applicant declines to apply for a job, or a recruiter passes on an applicant, we would, we would optionally essentially build in a qualitative feedback loop. Where both would essentially volunteer why they're passing on each other. And I think that qualitative feedback is important, because 9 times out of 10, when you get a rejection from an ATS, it's a very standard language, right? Oh, yeah. There's no feedback on why I was passed over or what I could do to improve. And our goal is to ensure that transparency goes back and forth.
Right. Yeah. No, that's clearly missing from the process. And since you're talking about data, anyway, it's like that. Yeah, that definitely needs to be there. So how do you think we get to a future? I mean, I guess you've already given a lot of examples, but how do we get to a future of human-centered hiring? Anything else we haven't covered yet?
So I think the number one point I would make is now is the time. So and one of the byproducts of COVID-19 and everything that we're going through from an industry perspective, right, and an economic downturn, is that it's truly allowed HR to have a massive reset in how they should move forward, right? We haven't had a chance to really just stop and say, we want to improve things drastically, because hiring will continue, things will continue, right? So now that we're in the stage where it's everything's kind of at a standstill, it is now a massive opportunity for diversity leaders, HR leaders, to take a step forward and say, the future of my workforce is X. And if it is this way, what are the processes the tools, the platforms, and the improvements that I need to go invest in to go there. And so when I talk to heads of HR now, it's really understanding their use case and saying, okay, if now is the time, we can help you build a blueprint of how to get from here to here, and then we can serve as an underlying platform to help you get there pre-hire. But then we also have an ecosystem of partners that we've aggressively started to build out, right? We've got DEI firms and DEI consultants that are using our data to build more effective programs. And so that's where we can start to bring in other partners to help ensure that your pre-hire process now goes from an old and outdated and antiquated and often extremely frustrating one to something that is more efficient and heavily focused on talent acquisition the way it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's great. And a lot of the other things we brought up, right? Bringing in the soft skills and, just making it a better experience. I think I like the equation to the CRM, right? Just understanding that these are people and they will have an opinion of your company based on that, that hiring process as well. And I think some companies get that, for sure.
Yeah, they do. And I think, you don't have to have a diversity person on the team to wake up and understand that diversity, more so today than before, doesn't need to be a byproduct. Mm-hmm. It needs to be woven into your process, right from the beginning, and it's not optional, right? And so this is something that we want to provide greater awareness on. Is there are tools and capabilities and a line of thinking that ensures that diversity just becomes natural to what you're doing, and makes you more efficient in how you recruit and hire.
Yeah. So definitely bring in that expertise temporarily or on a consultant basis. But I totally agree with you. Yeah, it needs to be everyone needs to have that awareness and training of how they can do better. So yeah, anything else that you want to add, or do you want to tell folks where they can get in touch with you or how to learn more?
Yeah, I mean, find me on LinkedIn, of course. I'm on Twitter. The quickest way to engage with Cambio is just go to Cambio, CAMBIOME.com. Check us out. For companies, we're offering free 30-day trials. So you can sign up, just for free, try out the system. We're happy to kind of walk you through tips and tricks on how to use the system. And for job seekers, now is your chance, right? So now is your chance to sign up, create your Cambio profile. We just launched a new update today that allows you to take your Cambio profile URL and share it everywhere, very similar to your LinkedIn profile. So think of it as your Cambio profile, but also your video. How do you put your best foot forward in front of people to essentially get through the gate, right? And for job seekers, it'll always be free. The service is always free for you. 10 months ago, I was in your shoes. I understand completely the frustration around it, more so than ever. So definitely give us a try. And then, I'm always available on email. My email is just neil@cambiome.com. And so, I'm happy to chat and happy to answer any questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. I think our viewers will get a lot out of what we talked about today. So thank you for sharing that wisdom.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
All right.
And thank you for having me.
Thanks, Neil.